In the ancient streets of Jerusalem around 1000 BCE, a figure sits alone in the growing shadows of dusk. The writer, perhaps David himself, dips his quill into ink, his brow furrowed with concern. The kingdom is prospering under his rule, but beyond the palace walls, corruption and injustice thrive. The powerful prey upon the weak. The wealthy exploit the vulnerable. And in these moments of darkness, a troubling question emerges. Where is God when evil seems to triumph? Have you ever looked at the world around you, the news headlines, the personal tragedies, the seemingly unchecked corruption, and wondered if God has somehow stepped away from his creation? If you have, you're not alone. This same question echoed in the heart of the psalmist nearly 3,000 years ago when he penned the words of Psalm 10. The answer, as we'll discover, isn't that God has abandoned us, but rather that his justice operates on a timeline and with a wisdom that challenges our human understanding. Psalm 10 belongs to what scholars call the lament psalms, raw, honest prayers that give voice to human suffering and confusion. In the original Hebrew manuscripts, Psalms the 9th and the 10th of May have once formed a single acrostic poem, as evidenced by their complementary themes and structure. While Psalm 9 celebrates God's righteous judgment, Psalm 10 questions why that judgment sometimes seems delayed. Let us journey through this ancient prayer, verse by verse, to understand its timeless message for our modern world. The psalm begins with a piercing question. Why, Lord, do you stand far off? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? This opening reveals the raw honesty that characterizes the Psalms. The writer doesn't mask his confusion or frustration. He directly questions God's apparent absence during times of distress. This is not blasphemy. It's authentic faith wrestling with life's painful realities. The Hebrew word used here for stand far off is tamid birachik, which carries the connotation of deliberately keeping one's distance. The psalmist feels that God has intentionally removed himself from human affairs, particularly when his presence is most desperately needed. Throughout history, believers have echoed this sentiment. During the Holocaust, many Jews questioned where God was as 6 million of their people perished. In 1939, as Nazi forces began their systematic genocide, Rabbi Yisrael Spira of Bluzhov cried out with words reminiscent of this psalm. When natural disasters claim thousands of lives or when innocent children suffer, the question resurfaces, why does God seem distant when evil prevails? The psalmist continues in verses 2 to 11, describing in vivid detail the character and actions of the wicked. In his arrogance, the wicked man hunts down the weak, who are caught in the schemes he devises. He boasts about the cravings of his heart. He blesses the greedy and reviles the Lord. In his pride, the wicked man does not seek him. In all his thoughts, there is no room for God. The Hebrew word for arrogance here is ge'ava, which implies not just pride, but a swelling up with self-importance that leaves no room for others or for God. The psalmist observes that this arrogance leads to calculated exploitation. The wicked hunt down the weak. The original Hebrew, dalek, suggests a hot pursuit, a persistent chase like a predator after prey. This isn't random evil, it's systematic oppression. The wicked person doesn't simply take advantage of opportunities. He actively devises schemes to trap those with less power. We see this pattern throughout history, from ancient systems of slavery to modern human trafficking networks, from corrupt political regimes to corporate exploitation of workers in developing nations. In 2013, the Rana Plaza garment factory in Bangladesh collapsed, killing over 1,100 workers who had been forced to work in an unsafe building to produce clothing for wealthy Western consumers. This modern example mirrors the systematic exploitation the psalmist described thousands of years ago. His ways are always prosperous. Your laws are rejected by him. He sneers at all his enemies. He says to himself, "Nothing will ever shake me." He swears, "No one will ever do me harm." Here, the psalmist captures a psychological reality that we still observe today. Those who consistently get away with wrongdoing begin to believe in their own invincibility. The Hebrew phrase balamat, "I shall not be moved," reflects an attitude of absolute security, a delusional confidence that consequences will never catch up to them. History is littered with examples of such hubris. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, pacing his palace roof around 562 BCE, declared, "Is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence, by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" Shortly after, according to biblical accounts, he was humbled and reduced to a state of madness. In more recent times, dictators like Romania's Nicolae Ceausescu maintained their sense of invulnerability right up until their sudden downfall in December 1989. His mouth is full of lies and threats. Trouble and evil are under his tongue. He lies in wait near the villages. From ambush he murders the innocent. His eyes secretly watch for his victims. Like a lion in cover he lies in wait. He lies in wait to catch the helpless. He catches the helpless and drags them off in his net. His victims are crushed. They collapse. They fall under his strength. The imagery here is powerful. The wicked person is described as a predator, specifically a lion, hiding and waiting for the perfect moment to attack. The Hebrew word yirav, he lies in wait, appears multiple times, emphasizing the calculated, patient nature of this evil. It's not impulsive but strategic, making it all the more dangerous. During the Rwandan genocide of 1994, neighbors who had lived peacefully together for years suddenly turned on each other. The systematic planning behind these attacks reflects this same calculated evil the psalmist described. Perpetrators didn't simply act on impulse. They created lists, organized death squads, and methodically executed their plans. He says to himself, "God will never notice." He covers his face and never sees. This verse identifies the root assumption behind wicked behavior, the belief that there is no ultimate accountability. The evildoer convinces himself that God either doesn't see or doesn't care about human affairs. The Hebrew phrase shachak el suggests not just that God has forgotten, but that he has deliberately chosen to ignore what happens on earth. This assumption, that no one is watching, that there is no final judgment, has empowered evil throughout human history. It's what Joseph Stalin was counting on when he orchestrated the Ukrainian Holodomor famine of 1932 to 1933, deliberately starving millions to death. It's what encourages corrupt officials to accept bribes behind closed doors, believing their actions will never come to light. Having thoroughly described the problem, the psalmist now shifts to an urgent appeal in verses 12 to 15. "Arise, Lord. Lift up your hand, O God. Do not forget the helpless. Why does the wicked man revile God? Why does he say to himself, 'He won't call me to account'? But you, God, see the trouble of the afflicted. You consider their grief and take it in hand. The victims commit themselves to you. You are the helper of the fatherless." The Hebrew word kuma, arise, is a military term, a call for God to take action like a warrior rising to defend his people. The psalmist doesn't simply ask God to observe but to intervene, to actively oppose those who are causing harm. This appeal comes with an important recognition. God actually does see everything, despite the wicked person's delusion. The Hebrew verb araya, to see, appears here, directly contradicting the claim that God will never notice. The psalmist affirms that God not only sees but takes it in hand. The Hebrew lakach biyadeka suggests receiving something personally, taking responsibility for it. Throughout history, the oppressed have drawn strength from this conviction. During the American Civil Rights Movement of the 1950s and 1960s, African American churches sang spirituals that echoed these same sentiments, expressing belief in a God who sees injustice and will ultimately bring liberation. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous declaration that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice, reflects this same faith in God's ultimate intervention. Break the arm of the wicked man. Call the evildoer to account for his wickedness that would not otherwise be found out. The image of breaking an arm is vivid and intentional. In ancient Near Eastern warfare, breaking an enemy's arm didn't just cause pain, it rendered them powerless to continue fighting. The psalmist isn't asking for minor inconvenience, but for complete disarmament of those who oppress others. The phrase would not otherwise be found out Hebrew. Baal Timsa carries the sense of thoroughly investigating until nothing evil remains hidden. In modern terms, we might think of forensic investigators who persist until they uncover every scrap of evidence, leaving no stone unturned. The final section, verses 16 to 18, shifts dramatically in tone from questioning to confidence. The Lord is king forever and ever. The nations will perish from his land. You, Lord, hear the desire of the afflicted. You encourage them, and you listen to their cry, defending the fatherless and the oppressed, so that mere earthly mortals will never again strike terror. After all the questioning and description of evil, the psalm concludes with absolute certainty: the Lord is king forever and ever. The Hebrew word melech, king, carries connotations not just of rulership but of legal authority and supreme governance. Despite appearances, God remains sovereign. The reference to nations perishing from his land reminds readers of historical events like the conquest of Canaan described in the book of Joshua around 1400 BCE, when, according to biblical accounts, God removed nations that had engaged in child sacrifice and extreme wickedness. It's a reminder that divine patience has limits. The psalm ends with focus on those who suffer. God hears them, encourages them, listens to their cry, and defends them. The Hebrew word for encourage here is chazak, which literally means to strengthen or make firm. God doesn't just offer emotional comfort, but provides genuine strengthening to those who have been weakened by oppression. The final phrase, so that mere earthly mortals will never again strike terror, emphasizes human frailty despite any temporary power they might wield. The Hebrew word enosh for mortal specifically highlights human weakness and limitations. No matter how powerful oppressors might seem, they remain mere mortals before an eternal God. What relevance does this ancient psalm hold for us today? In a world where evil still flourishes, where human trafficking generates billions in illegal profits, where corruption undermines democracies, where powerful individuals seem to escape consequences, these words still resonate. First, Psalm 10 gives us permission for honest questioning. When we see suffering and injustice, we don't need to suppress our questions. The biblical tradition itself models this kind of raw honesty before God. In September 2001, as Americans grappled with the terrorist attacks that claimed nearly 3,000 lives, many believers found themselves asking the same question that opens this psalm. Why, Lord, do you stand far off? Rabbi Harold Kushner's famous book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, published in 1981 following his son's death from a rare genetic disorder, continues to provide comfort precisely because it acknowledges the legitimacy of these questions. Second, the psalm reminds us that apparent prosperity doesn't equal divine approval. When we see corrupt individuals seemingly thriving, this doesn't indicate God's endorsement or absence. The temporary success of wickedness is just that, temporary. History repeatedly demonstrates this truth. The Nazi regime appeared unstoppable at its height in 1941, controlling most of continental Europe. Yet by 1945, its leaders were either dead, imprisoned, or fugitives. More recently, financier Bernie Madoff operated the largest Ponzi scheme in history, amassing billions through fraud until his empire collapsed in 2008, leading to a 150-year prison sentence where he died in 2021. Third, Psalm 10 assures us that God sees those who suffer. In a world where many victims feel invisible, whether they're children in abusive homes, refugees fleeing violence, or elderly people suffering neglect, this psalm insists that God notices their pain. The Hebrew worldview doesn't separate spiritual concerns from social justice. They are intimately connected. During the Darfur genocide beginning in 2003, when the international community was slow to respond to mass killings in Sudan, many humanitarian workers drew strength from this conviction that even when the world looks away, God sees. Organizations like World Vision and Samaritan's Purse continued their work in dangerous regions, motivated by the belief that caring for victims is a divine priority. Fourth, the psalm reminds us that human power has limits. No matter how untouchable oppressors may seem, they remain mere earthly mortals. History repeatedly demonstrates how quickly seemingly invincible powers can fall. The Soviet Union, which dominated half of Europe for decades, dissolved almost overnight in December 1991. Technology giants that once seemed unassailable, companies like Nokia, BlackBerry, and Kodak, rapidly lost their market dominance when they failed to adapt. Human power, no matter how extensive, always faces limitations. Finally, Psalm 10 encourages patient trust in divine justice. While the psalmist urgently asks God to act, he also acknowledges God's timing and sovereignty. Justice may not arrive on our preferred schedule, but it will come. South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, established in 1996 after decades of apartheid, embodied this principle. After years of seemingly unchecked oppression, a process of accountability and healing began. While imperfect, it represented a step toward the justice the psalmist envisions. As we reflect on Psalm 10 today, we might consider how its wisdom applies to contemporary challenges. When we see corporate executives prioritizing profits over worker safety, politicians enriching themselves through corruption, or powerful individuals escaping consequences for abuse, we naturally feel the same frustration the psalmist expressed. Rather than either passive acceptance or cynical despair, this psalm models a third response: honest questioning combined with persistent hope. We can acknowledge the reality of evil while still affirming that it doesn't have the final word. Consider how this ancient wisdom might inform our approach to modern issues like climate justice, systemic racism, economic inequality, or human rights abuses. The psalmist would encourage us to name these evils clearly, to stand with those who suffer their effects, and to work for change while trusting in ultimate justice. The 19th century British politician William Wilberforce exemplified this approach in his decades-long fight against the slave trade. Despite overwhelming opposition from powerful economic interests, he persisted year after year, introducing anti-slavery legislation repeatedly until it finally passed in 1807. His patience and persistence reflected the same faith that permeates Psalm 10. A conviction that justice may be delayed but cannot ultimately be denied. In our personal lives too, when we face situations where wrongdoers seem to prosper while good people suffer, this psalm offers both comfort and challenge. It validates our questions while calling us to a deeper trust that looks beyond immediate circumstances. The message of Psalm 10 isn't passive resignation to injustice but active engagement with it, naming it honestly, opposing it consistently, and trusting that beyond our limited perspective, the God who sees all is working toward ultimate restoration. As Holocaust survivor and author Elie Wiesel observed decades after his liberation from Buchenwald concentration camp in 1945, there may be times when we are powerless to prevent injustice, but there must never be a time when we fail to protest against it. This spirit of persistent witness against evil, even when immediate change seems unlikely, embodies the psalm's approach. So when you next encounter situations that make you question where God is, whether global tragedies or personal injustices, remember the psalmist who voiced these same questions thousands of years ago. Take comfort not in easy answers, but in the permission to ask honestly, to lament openly, and to trust that beyond our limited vision, justice is still coming. For in the end, the psalm reminds us, the wicked are mere mortals, but the Lord is king forever and ever. And in that eternal perspective lies our hope. The words of Psalm 10 continue to echo through synagogues, churches, and private prayers around the world, not because they offer simple solutions, but because they speak truth about both human suffering and divine faithfulness. They remind us that honest questions don't diminish faith but can actually deepen it. As we close our reflection on this ancient prayer, perhaps its most powerful message is that we are seen, both in our suffering and in our questioning. When we feel invisible or wonder if our pain matters, Psalm 10 assures us that it does. The God who seems distant is actually paying closer attention than we realize. And that assurance, across 3 millennia, still offers hope in our darkest moments. Before you go, I want to personally invite you to be part of our growing community here at Prayer Universe. If this video touched your heart or brought you peace, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a prayer or message that can uplift your spirit. But most importantly, I'd love to hear from you. In the comments below, share just one word or phrase of motivation that this video inspired in you, whether it's hope, gratitude, peace, or something else. Your words matter deeply to us because they help guide the content we create for this channel. Together, let's build a space filled with faith, encouragement, and connection. Thank you for being here, and remember, every prayer counts. See you in the next one.